Hello again, everyone, from the University of Missouri Turfgrass Research Center. This is Lee Miller and my assistant, Daniel Earlywine. We're going to be talking about brown patch. And in the next presentation, we're going to be talking about early fungicide apps for large patch. But in this case, we're going to talk about brown patch. Both of these are kind of related pathogens. One impacts cool season turf grass, obviously tall fescue here. The next presentation will be about zoysia grass. But I'm going to share right at the onset of this trial on April 9th. So we got started really early with these applications. It did have one misstep in here. Just when you hear that there is an application made at a 65-degree soil temperature threshold, we actually changed that to make that an early curative application. So let's listen. Good morning. It's a chilly morning here on April 9th, 2021. We are initiating a brown patch on tall fescue trial. You obviously don't think about brown patch in early spring like we are here, but we're trying to time some treatments based on soil temperature thresholds, specifically 5-day average soil temperatures. We're going to be applying 5 different fungicide treatments at the 55, 60, and 65 degree soil temperature threshold. And then we're also going to be doing a 28-day, a standard 28-day treatment, and then also a curative treatment. The idea is these early applications, can we get more efficiency or more effectiveness out of an early application as opposed to going more close to when brown patch actually occurs? So Dan, you want to go through some of the objectives and our methods here?
Yeah, so our first trial objective was to look at sprayable versus granular fungicides and see if there's any big differences doing the two together. And then also look at the standard preventative versus single application timings to see how much bang for the buck you can get for one single app. We wanted to target 55 and 60 degree soil temps, usually early on before we typically would go out for an application. And that's based on a 5-day soil average. And then our curative application, we wanted to get at least 10%, if not more, brown patch severity within the plots before we made the application. The preventative applications, we started mid-May. That's usually what we typically do for Missouri for our weather conditions here, and based it on a 28-day interval. So we went May, June, July, and then August to finish up. This is a plot map of the trial area. You can see the first reps broken down into different blocks, which we'll discuss in a little bit more. But to break it down even more, we have the different timings looking at 55, 60, our preventative apps again, May, June, July, and August, and then an early curative application once we start to see brown patch symptoms. Our sprayable treatments were Pillar, SC, Heritage TL, and Armada, and our granular applications were Heritage G and Pillar G. Our application dates for 55 degree soil temps actually hit on April 9th with a single application. We followed up on April 30th when we hit 60 degree soil temps. Our preventative applications were made on May 14th and then every 28 days later. And our early curative application was made on May 28th, where we finally started to see brown patch within these plots. This is the early curative plots looking on May 28th. When we made this application, you can see the untreated control, and then all the other plots have active brown patch within each one of them. When we look at the NDVI, looking at a drone picture of this, these are broken down. The 55 is highlighted in yellow. If we move across, you can see the individual blocks of the 55 and 60 doing fairly good. The preventative apps, you don't see any brown within those areas, but when we move to the last area, the early curative, you can really see the brown patch in these plots versus the green area where you don't see the symptoms. When we look at the NDVI and we take it underneath, you can see that the areas in red are highlighted areas that are brown, corresponding to the brown patch within the plots versus the preventative where you see less of the red area. This is looking at 55 degree soil temps. This is July 9th. You can see there's breakthrough within the untreated control as well as the other plots. And again, this is almost 2 months after these single applications were made. To look at this in a little bit more detail, so this is at the very beginning when we started to see brown patch in these plots. This is, again, one single application made on April 9th, so keep that in mind. And I'm going to kind of go through the time course of how this looked throughout the season. So moving forward, June 11th, we actually had a decrease in brown patch. We had some cooler temperatures and some rain as well as that. So we're kind of setting the stage. June 25th, again, kind of went down. So keep that in mind as we look through these. You know, we had an early onslaught of brown patch, and then we had a big kaboom. So basically, we got into that July 4th, and it really kind of took off on us. And what I want to point out here is that there's no difference between any of these treatments.
including the untreated, as opposed to some of the differences we were seeing early on. And you go forward, and again, there's no difference. So that 55 really kind of shows that there is a time limit for how long these fungicides are going to be effective after you make the application. They are going to wear out, and we've seen that in other research as well. We get to the 60-degree soil temperature date, and again, we're showing all these July 9th pictures on purpose, and that's when we really had a large amount of outbreaks. So when we look at May 28th, you can see how much we had in the untreated. We did see kind of over and over again that pillar G wasn't quite giving us the same amount of control that pillar SC was. So there's some difference there between the granular application, the sprayable in that respect. And then we go through and you can see there's our downward trend again. We saw that in all the plots, and then kaboom, there's July 9th again. No difference in any of the treatments. And in fact, some of the treatments were actually more than the untreated. So again, we're kind of getting to that point where unfortunately, this is 2 months later. So we're seeing that break. And really, when we think about fungicide, what we see on the label for brown patch, it's always 21, 28 days. And we're kind of seeing that kind of go away here as well with these early applications. And again, no statistical difference between any of these treatments, which means nothing was working. Getting to our early curative, and this gets a little bit more interesting. We get to July 9th. Again, we're seeing some breakthrough there, but this is at the outset. So we have not made an application yet. This is what triggered those curative applications. We did kind of intrinsically have a lot of brown patch in those Armada plots. That happens even with replication. So keep that in mind when we're kind of looking at the Armada going forward, but look at the decrease. So this really tells a lot about the curative activity of these fungicides, and they're actually very good. So maybe we're kind of going along this course of trying to find soil temperature thresholds to time this, but maybe early curative is actually going to be the best. We move forward, we're still not seeing break. Even into that July 9th, we're not seeing near as much as we had in the 55 and the 60 degree. And again, we're seeing differences between the fungicide treatments and the untreated. Moving forward, you can see, we get into July 23rd, we're seeing that breakage, and we would expect that. So the preventative, the standard application scheme, which is, this is going to be every 28 days starting in mid-May. You would expect these to work very well, but this is 14 days after the first treatment, and you can see here that pillar G's not quite gotten in there yet and started to work in these plots. Now, as we move forward and we start to go a little bit farther, this is what you would expect to see out of this standard application scheme, this routine application scheme. Seeing a little bit of break again in the pillar G and the heritage G in this case too. Look at our increase on July 9th though, and you can see that these preventative applications are actually holding the disease in check. And then you move on to July 23rd and you can kind of see what's going on there. So I'm going to show you area under the disease progress curve. And basically, this is just taking all of those ratings and mushing them into one. So we have 5 or 6 rating dates there. This is just kind of a way for us to look at all of those ratings at one time and really kind of look at what's happened throughout the whole season. So I'm going to go through each one of our factors. So the fungicide factor, you can see that all the fungicides work better than the untreated, as you would expect, even averaged over all of our different treatment schemes. But you can see there that the pillar SC is working better than the pillar G. So that is a difference that we saw between the granular formulation and the sprayable formulation. Heritage TL, Heritage G, and Armada, all of them kind of are in the same league there as far as control. When we think about timing, the untreated is here just to kind of show you what the differences were, as actually making these applications, but you can't actually put them into the statistics here. We're really kind of looking at the difference between our 4 treatment timings. So April 9th is kind of on the tall end, not statistically different from curative, but the curative's not statistically different than the 60 degree either. So when I think about if I was going to try to go early just with one application, I would probably go with that curative, because although you're going to see some outbreaks early, you're actually going to get more on the back end. You're going to get farther into the season. And then, of course, you see the 28-day preventative doing exactly what we were expected to do. Did not in this study see any difference between the granular formulations and the sprayable. Now that is combining those. So we didn't see any difference between Heritage G and Heritage TL. but we did see differences between pillar G and pillar SC. So to wrap all this up and for some conclusions, there seems to be a finite life to fungicides, particularly for something targeting brown patch in the field. When you think about mowing it off, most of these fungicides, actually all of the ones in this study, are acropetal. That means they move up in the plant. So they move up in the plant, they get mowed off, and they kind of are removed that way. So we can actually go too early and you're not going to be able to squeeze more life out of them. If you scout for brown patch damage early and apply the first application curatively, that might be the best method for timing and actually getting the longest window out of a single application. And then last but not least, like I said, some of the granular counterparts to the sprayable products just didn't work as well. In particular, that pillar G versus the pillar SC. With that, we'll go ahead and take some questions. This is a photo of our NTEP trial. We've got 132 NTEP tall fescue varieties that we're evaluating now. And you can see that there are some differences there in the resistance levels. None of them are completely resistant, but boy, the brown patch really puts the kibosh on some of them when it gets rolling along. So we'll go ahead and take some questions. Thank you.